although I've been known as a guitarist in music, really that was an accidental byproduct of me failing to make it as a solo artist. Well, he just puts you at your ease straight away. Hi, I'm David. Once he got to like you, you were just allowed to do what you want. You just had to bring something. The song Outside, which is the title of the Outside album, started off as a song called Love is Essential, which was my song. He brought Mick Jagger into the place, and we sat and worked out dancing in the street. There was a real extreme sense of togetherness and love that day. All the records that were made then had to do with air moving. 99% of pop music today is just digital bits being moved around through cable.
Can you remember that day and how it affected you? Don't go away, more of Kevin Armstrong coming up, but first please like, subscribe or become a member of this channel. Kevin Armstrong, welcome. You've got a beautiful garden behind you. Where are you?
Yeah, it's not so bad. It's a nice on a sunny day. Like today's a sunny day. We've had some horrible weather, but we're out there all year round, really.
Yeah, no, it looks beautiful. I want to start with the music that you were brought up around as a young child, what your parents played and what really sort of imbued into your world at a young age.
Well, they both loved music. My mother was very musical. She was musically talented. She was quite a talented pianist. And my father loved music, although he was tone deaf himself. But he loved, he had a collection of 78s from the Dixieland jazz era, Bix Beiderbecke and Jelly Roll Morton and that kind of thing. And my mother liked classical music. So there was a bit of after Rubinstein and a bit of Bach and things like that, Brandenburg concertos and that kind of thing. And they both liked Tom Lehrer, the Harvard professor, maths professor, who was a brilliant, witty songwriter, and his stuff was great.
So you've got that one side, and when you're growing up and you hear your parents' music, there's a point where you start forming your own taste and you start liking the music that's around you. You, I believe, were close to your brother when you were young, and I presume that your musical tastes sort of fed off each other in a way.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, we had some somewhat different tastes, but they were very complementary. Neither of us actively disliked what the other one liked, but we had different tastes. But yeah, we shared a bedroom until we were sort of 12 and 13. So you can see my missus in the background gardening there. Yeah, we shared a room, and so we did share things, and we used to listen to the Radio 1. Well, Radio 1 was a little later, but pirate radio stations and then Radio 1, the chart shows. We were there with the poised over the cassette recorder, recording our favorite chart songs at the weekend and things like that. And then as an early teenager, we did have a mutual love for David Bowie. He introduced me to the music of Bowie, and he was a year younger than me, Ross. And he died in 1979 in a motorbike accident, but we were very close brothers until we were there, till he died at age 19 or age 20.
Well, there is a story that he took you to Haddon Hall, didn't he? So where Bowie was based in Beckenham, I believe.
Yeah, he didn't. We had mutual friends as early teenagers. We had a couple of mutual friends with cars, and so we used to just knock around in a gang together, the way that kids used to then, and. So yeah, we all went on an expedition to Haddon Hall one time. It wasn't that he took me there. We were both hanging out with a bunch of friends, and we just said, let's go there, because we live nearby.
I know this is a difficult place to go, but I think when there's a traumatic event in your younger life, and I've got one, I think most people have some form of trauma in their early life, and the fact that your brother died is a massive traumatic event. Can you tell me how that initially affected you and the family?
Well, it atomized the family, really. My parents had kind of broken up a year or two before, so they were living apart anyway, and it just atomized the family, really, because he was a bit of family glue. Ross, he was the favourite son, and he was close to my mother very much, and so it did affect everybody very, very significantly, and that kind of loss at that age, it doesn't really sink in the repercussions it has for the rest of your life. even later on, it just mutates as an influence on your life, doesn't it? So it was very shocking at the time, and basically, I suppose it contributed to the fact that we're not particularly close family. The family didn't really keep very close after that.
I mean, I think what's fascinating about these events and what happens is that in some way, whenever I've interviewed, I interview a lot of musicians and pop stars and whatever, but
Sure.
creative people. And what it does, it somehow seems to feed their drive to be successful. It's like looking for the compensation of what happened in the childhood.
Well, it had a big effect on my creative life for sure. I mean, I was definitely on the, being a musician. I was writing songs. I was trying to get a record deal. I was doing all that and had bands and things. When Ross died, it actually did. The whole the entire atmosphere of what I was doing changed completely overnight. It's almost like I put a shutter down on everything I'd done before and started again creatively. And it did actually spin me off into a totally different direction. Yeah, for sure, it did.
So explain that sort of shift and that direction to me.
I think I think with a lot of creativity, like as with a lot of creativity in people, it's a search for authenticity, isn't it? It's a search to express or share something that's quite deep within you. That's what songwriters, poets, artists, painters all do and try and do. And I think there's possibly this is just theorizing, but I think there's possibly a place that it takes a long time to get to that place sometimes, to be authentic about how you, and so you can quite often be quite derivative in what you're doing, or you're copying someone else, or you're trying to think this is what a young rock star should sound like, kind of thing. And you're sort of slightly detached from it, or and it's like something of an exercise. But when something like that happens, it's so very real that you maybe want to look at your work and go, that's not me really, is it? This is me, and I feel this now. And I think it maybe gets you closer to the essence of something realer to say, maybe.
Yeah, I also feel that when you can, in a sense, feed off the difficulties and feed off the pain in your childhood, it somehow
it's a healing thing, isn't it?
Well, it relates to the audience, because as a part of the audience, we also have pain in some way. And somehow,
absolutely,
through music, through the sounds, through the lyrics, through the person, we can relate.
It's the sense of connection, isn't it? Trying to connect on a real level. And, that, I suppose that was what I was trying to do. And it did feel to me like a new beginning. With his death, it felt like a new beginning creatively, where I thought, well, I'm not going back to what I was doing there. I'm going to go off on this other path. And so the whole sound of everything, the way I approached music altogether changed at that point. Quite dramatic it was, yeah.
In the book that you wrote, which lays everything bare, it's a fantastic book because it just feels like the honesty is so on the surface. You can really feel the honesty in the book. You write about 3 life-changing experiences in your early years, which were musical experiences with Alice Cooper, Frank Zappa, and Led Zeppelin. What were those 3 artist groups? What really impressed you about them?
Oh, I don't know whether I had the critical faculties I had later. I was only an early teenager. I think it was just the sense of awe, really, just the experience of, the awe-inspiring experience of seeing these gods in the flesh, with their gear I had no idea what they were doing. I had no idea how to get anywhere near that kind of, ability to do what they were doing. But I really wanted to understand it. And I think it was just the awestruck thing of seeing that when you first go to a gig, you're very impressionable at early teenage, like a sponge, and I think I just think those experiences really made me, just a sense of wonder, that could happen in the world. People like that could exist and make that sound.
When did people around you notice your musical ability?
Oh, very early on. My mother offered me piano lessons at age 6 or 7 or something. And so I was studying piano from then until I gave it up at around 13 or something, 13, 14. And as soon as I picked up the guitar at age 12, 13, it was pretty clear that I had some kind of aptitude for it, and so people noticed fairly quickly. And I was in bands and earning money at age 13 at the weekends. Yeah.
I mean, a guitar is somewhat of a phallic, it's a cliche, but it's somewhat of a phallic symbol. But I think more than that, people who play guitar can turn from being quite shy to somehow being popular and charismatic. How did that operate for you?
I don't know. I think that came. I think a lot of the whole sense of being a performer has come much later and come much slower to me. It was really about the mechanics of it and the art of it and the kind of the craft of it and learning being seduced by the sounds. Really, I was always very sensitive to that and wanting to know how that was done. And so it was like a sort of it was a bit of a technical craft approach for me. And it wasn't until much later, and even now, still, I'm conscious of the fact that, there's things like, if I watch back little YouTube clips of Iggy Pop or whatever, I just think, I could have moved more on that gig. Or I could have done, I'm still learning about that performance thing and trying to be a bit looser as a person to do that. I don't think I get close to it, but it's a lifelong, wish to do that. Really, I don't think I'm a natural performer. I'm a natural introvert, really.
Your first sort of foray into the world of, I don't know, like world of like that in a sense the sort of commercial world of pop was this boy group, Fiverr, I think it was called, wasn't it? Yeah. How important was this for understanding this was not what you wanted to do or be?
Well, like on the road to anything, it was just a sort of a wrong turn. It was it was an opportunity at once to sort of see a part of the music business and to very quickly learn that it was a part of the music business I wasn't really interested in. But it did bring me into contact peripherally with a lot of other things. I think I describe in the book, the manager of that band bought this old semi-derelict theatre and used to rent it out to famous bands to rehearse in because it was a big rehearsal space, a theatre-sized rehearsal space for bands just about to go on tour. So as an impressionable young musician, I was able to sit in the stalls and watch Thin Lizzy and Johnny Guitar Watson and the Gladiators and the Sex Pistols rehearse. So that brought me into contact with that. At the same time, I was in a band that wasn't allowed to make their own records and just took photographs and then had session musicians make their records. And so I just thought, well, this is not. I'm in the wrong place here. I want to be up there. I don't want to be sitting here, doing this. So it was just a detour, really.
I mean, when I think back about the 70s, I mean, I'm a gay guy, so in the 70s I was a young gay kid, and that for me, it was the 70s in Britain were dominated by this sort of social divide, racism, homophobia, a lot of shitty things, to be honest.
Yeah.
And the music for me was a complete escape and a way of connecting with like-minded people who weren't
very much so
into these things.
Yeah, very much so. I completely understand that as someone who's we're probably of a similar age that grew up in those times. It was definitely it had a social element, didn't it? It was like you were trying to find a connection to something which had nothing to do with the authoritarian, boring kind of narrowness of our previous generations. You were looking to escape from it, and so quite a lot of the people that we admired as musicians, that was exactly why, because they were rebels and they were looking for a new way forward and new ways of living. And that's definitely, I definitely feel that. For instance, racism. I was definitely grew up in a racist kind of milieu, in my childhood among a lot of contemporaries, and was very quickly cured of it once I moved to London and started seeing reggae bands and hanging out with black people and things. It was a very different thing. And it's, again, direct connection to the music, really, as a way forward, for whatever diversity which we learn to embrace as adults. Music was a great way to do it in the 1970s, of course.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that when you look back, how do you view that era in today's context?
Well, it was a golden age, I think. I mean, it's very easy to say that because you're emotionally connected to it as a younger person, but it did have this experimental, wild edges. And if you look back at or listen back to the variety of music that was in the charts then, and that was, I mean, I'm quite interested in this as a producer of music as well. and a writer. I'm quite interested in the fact that I was watching a thing the other day about it, and they're saying that all the records that were made then had to do with air moving. So sounds being made, crossing the air and going into microphones. Whereas 99% of pop music today is just digital bits being moved around through cables. There's no, so that's quite as, you know, it seems like nothing, but it's like, that's the reason we had all that variety and experimentation. People were just trying to do things. Frank Zappa said, you know, there used to be these old cigar chomping A&R men in Hollywood in the 60s who would just, you'd put something in front of them and they'd say, I don't know what it is, just let's put some money into it, see if the kids like it. And you can't imagine that today. Today it's just marketing algorithms and TV reality shows and all these shortcuts and things. So I think we had it really good in the 70s. We really did have the explosion of creativity post rock and roll and pre-punk and then post-punk, and it was an amazing time to be around, I think.
And talking of punk and social divide, I remember that Bill Grundy interview of the Pistols and the aftermath. And I actually interviewed Glenn Matlock recently, and I think that was a sort of, for me, that was a huge turning point of everything, because the old and the new sort of spun on its head through this interview in a way.
Yeah, well, for the first time, I guess you had a civil war in counterculture, even, didn't you? You know, you had your hippies and your space wizards and demons and all the rest of it, and then suddenly punk turned on them. And I'd grown up loving Yes and ELP and all that. I'd listen to that, and Led Zeppelin and all that. I'd listen to that and soaked it all up. And suddenly, the orthodoxy's got to change now. If I don't move with the times, or you know, then clearly even my choices are being frowned on by a new generation. So that was a big moment for me, punk. It was like, because I was a musician before punk and learnt from the pre-punk era. And then suddenly, I think a lot of punk musicians did too. There were lots of them around who really knew what they were doing, but had to sort of slightly pretend they didn't. In order to fit
you met
in
the Pistols around then as well, didn't you? Shortly after that.
Yeah, I did. I'm a few days afterwards. Yeah, they were rehearsing in that aforementioned theatre in North London for the Anarchy tour. So I did meet them then, and I was very wary of the whole thing. I was just thinking, oh my goodness, who are these guys going to, you know, bite my fingers off or something? And of course, I've got to know so many of them. I worked with Steve Jones and John Lydon and Glenn even recently. So you know, I soon got to know what punk was about. And through the squatting era as well, I was squatting in the early 80s next door to the Slits. And so I got to know a lot of these people, but it took me a while to sort of readjust my head and thinking, oh, music's going to go off in a different way now, you know.
One person that it feels like, you know, he had a very big influence on you. And this is obviously in the late 70s when punk sort of, it turned, and then there was this sort of electronic explosion. And then Thomas Dolby, you were in a band called Local Heroes and you met Dolby. Can you tell me about your impression of him?
First of all, there's an interesting sort of Bowie-related story, which is the song Outside, which is the title of the Outside album. Started off as a song called Love is Essential, which was my song, a Local Heroes song on the second Local Heroes album in 1980, 81, something like that. And our bass player, Matthew Seligman, my late great friend, said that he wanted to introduce me to this guy who would maybe play some electronica on the album. So Thomas came and worked on my record, first of all. And immediately I just realized he was a very, very clever guy. You know, what he did to the record was great. He just had a way of adding sounds in the studio, which was just like unlike anything I'd come across up to that point. I just thought, this is brilliant what he's doing. And we've stayed in touch. And obviously he was a big influence on me, because then he employed me as his guitarist for several years. And I got involved in some of his early work and latter work as well. In fact, we last toured in 2012 in America. His album called A Map of the Floating City, which is a really great record. So Thomas has been a big figure in my life in terms of music. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, you worked with him on Europa and the Pirate Twins, I think, was one of the early...
Europa was the first. That was the first thing of his that I worked on. Yeah.
And also, right. She Blinded Me with Science, which was the sort of the hit
Yeah,
that
well,
he
Matthew
had.
and I really helped arrange that. We were very, very instrumental in that. The whole arrangement, that whole idea, is actually a sort of, bass, drums, and guitar. It's a very much a sort of a band, a product of a band jamming together, and I was very involved in that. Yes.
One thing that was interesting in your book for me was that there you are with Dolby, and things are moving along well. You're employed, let's say, you're earning money, but you don't.
Yeah.
You decide against staying with him. You believe that
Well, I
isn't
was
for
always
you.
I was always looking to be a solo artist. Really, I was always looking to develop myself as an artist, as a songwriter. And although I've been known as a guitarist in music, really that was an accidental byproduct of me failing to make it as a solo artist. So that's always been. I've always come back to that, and I'm still trying now. Just in a creative way for myself. I've just got another album ready to go now. It's just about to be mastered. So I'm still making albums in my 60s, hoping that I'm going to, make something that will leave behind something for somebody. So that's
Well,
why. I mean, it was really great to be with Thomas, and it was because he was going on a rocket to the moon, and I was there with him, and that was really nice. But then I got the opportunity to pursue a career as a singer-songwriter again, so I went back to try and do that. Didn't work out very well, but then I got to meet David Bowie.
well, I'll get to that in
So
a second, but this was Bush Telegraph, I presume.
yeah.
And there's a moment where you describe where you started to doubt yourself as a front man. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, I think it was the real thing was we had a video I had a deal with EMI, and we had a video made for a first single of Bush Telegraph, and it was a massive production. It was a big budget and an American director and a set in the middle of the woods and all these extras and all this thing. And I just suddenly had a crisis where I just thought, this isn't really me. I suddenly sort of just doubted I could pull that off or play that role in a way. And so, looking back on it, I'm surprised they gave me the opportunity in the first place, because although I think I'm a pretty good songwriter, I'm not pop star material particularly. Perhaps they hoped I could be, and perhaps it was just the era in the early 80s. They were just throwing money at everything that was potential for a while. They just supported it. So I was lucky with that, but it just wasn't going to be me. I wasn't going to be able to do that. Just psychologically, it's just not me. I'm not really a front man.
Were you psychologically rock bottom just before the Bowie opportunity came
Yeah,
up?
pretty much actually. Yeah, I was. I in my personal relationships which had gone wrong, and near homelessness, and then the loss of my record deal and band and money and lawyer and that overnight. So it really was quite a pinch point. I would have had to really reconsider everything if that had not happened. So it is a definite stroke of luck. Whether luck is a thing or whether it's just I was in the right place at the right time and that. But that's what happened. I really was at rock bottom when I got this call from Hugh Stanley Clark at EMI saying, I think I'm going to throw you a lifeline here. Go to Abbey Road.
And you really didn't know who you're going to meet?
No, genuinely not. No, we weren't told. It was a secret. It was a sort of state secret because this person couldn't be in the country for tax reasons. So we turned up there. These musicians turned up there thinking, who is it going to be?
But you knew it was someone big. It must have been.
We knew, obviously, Abbey Road, the secrecy, the cloak and dagger bit, and the quality of the musicians they'd chosen for it. I just thought, well, this is going to be exciting. We didn't know who's going to be, but we knew it was going to be something exciting. Yeah.
Tell me about that moment when Bowie walks in.
Well, he just puts you at your ease straight away. Hi, I'm David. It was just he was always very easygoing. A lot of crackling energy around him, but very funny and very personable, and straight away puts you at your ease. And creatively, he allowed people a lot of leeway. He wanted you once he got to like you. You were just allowed to do what you want. You just had to bring something, and that was good.
There's this sort of moment of trust with Bowie that once he has this trust that you can do and you bringing something into the mix, I presume.
Yeah, there's not much control. There was no control freakery about him in term musically, which I've never understood, because when I make records, I'm quite picky. You know, I suppose it comes from the Dolby school and everything. Quite sort of, you know, very particular about the choices and everything. But if he was doing that, then it was all under the hood, and it was all had the appearance of everything unfolding very naturally and very quickly.
And he'd come to Abbey Road because of Julian Temple's Absolute Beginners and the soundtrack, and he was working on
Yes.
That's Motivation. That was the track you were working on. Can you tell me about the technique that he employed to you know, that you're all employed, but
yeah, well, I think I describe it in the book. Because he didn't know us, he didn't know us. It was a bunch of new musicians he'd never met, so he taught us bits of a quite complicated. That's Motivation is quite a complicated song. It's like a jazz big band thing from the movie, and so he taught us little bits of it, and then once we learned a bit of it, we'd record that, and then the engineer would have to actually literally stab the button for us to drop in for the next bit. So it was like a jigsaw. It was like playing a jigsaw, and we did that, and it was quite a sort of unrewarding experience at the beginning. It was sort of quite tense, you know, to sort of, oh, can we do this? And everybody on tenterhooks, because you're being dropped into the tape and you have to play perfectly in time and all the rest of it. So that was quite difficult. But then what happened was at the end of the session, he wanted to do something else. He said, I've got this half-baked idea and let's try and stick it down, because he didn't want to waste any of the studio time. And that was Absolute Beginners. That was the song Absolute Beginners, which he showed. And that's, I think, you know, I just helped him realize that it was a finished piece. He didn't think it was. And I thought, yeah, it is. And I sort of managed to knock it together with him. Not that I wrote anything, but I got him to realize the structure of it, and then when we put it down at the end of that session, that was the light bulb moment, I think, for him and me, and that song, because it just straight away it made the hairs on the back of your neck go up, and you just thought, fucking this is brilliant. And then he just said, well, let's continue to work, and he wanted me for the actual record, and then he wanted me for Live Aid, and then that led on to the 10-year relationship we had.
One story you're missing out is the one that everyone wants to hear, but you know, where he came up to you and asked you if you could score some.
The Angie Bowie story.
Yes, so brilliant.
Well, it is, yeah. Yeah, he whispered in my ear that, you know, that he wanted some Coke quite halfway through this session, and I made a phone. The potted version of it, you have to read the book, but the potted version is I made a phone call and I managed to get it sent to the studio, and the person got it from Angie Bowie, and it was a complete coincidence, so an extraordinary thing. But no harm done, and I think that was the very last time I ever saw him indulge in anything like that as well. So that was probably, you know, could have been the very fag end of his usage. I mean, on that day, he was doing the Labyrinth sessions as well with Jim Henson in Abbey Road in a different studio. So he was running up and down the stairs doing 2 different projects.
I mean, that was notorious, actually, the Jim Henson thing as well. So I think he was at this stage of change. But, you know, you mentioned at the end, the Absolute Beginners track, and that is Trust. And then he asked you to go and arrange a track that evening. So tell me about that.
There was a little gap between the initial meeting in Abbey Road and then the planned session to actually do the final recording, which is a different studio with different producers and all the rest of it. So in that intervening period, he had asked me, he said, well, I want you to do that, and I also want you to do this band for a charity concert I've been asked to do with Bob Geldof. And I was just like, at that time my head was spinning, and I thought, this is brilliant, you know, to be asked to do these things. And then he did get me to go and meet him in Soho, because he had an idea for an add-on for the Live Aid thing. And I just basically went with an acoustic guitar and sat with him, and where he brought Mick Jagger into the place, and we sat and worked out Dancing in the Street, because we were going to tack it on to the end of the Absolute Beginners recording session, and then then we all got in a bus and went and watched them make that ridiculous video as well.
Yeah. But I mean, what's fascinating is that there you are, that, you know, like you were a bit down on your luck. You're obviously still active, and that's the point that you could get something. But at the same time, it's like your life is flipped on its head,
Yeah,
you
it
know?
really did. It flipped, but at the same time, I had the strangest sort of calmness, and a feeling that I was in the right place, and that you know this is the right steps. These are the right steps for me to continue having a relationship with professional music without any barriers to that. And I felt that I just had a sense of somehow a sort of self faith, faith in myself, which is like, this is the right place to be, and this is what will carry me forward in some way. And it's proved to be. I mean, I don't think I've been a very strategic person in my career. I've never sort of said, well, this is the goal for this year and that's the goal for next year and these are the numbers. I've never thought in that way. I've always just taken things as they come. And that was a supreme moment of trust in myself, in a way, just to go, yeah, this is the right thing to do, and I think I can do something here. It doesn't mean I didn't fall on my arse, several times since then, and maybe continue to do, but it felt like the right thing to do.
But if Bowie says to you, can you form a band for Live Aid? Okay, Live Aid before the event may not have seemed what the event was, but you knew it was going to be a fairly big event.
It was going to be big, yeah. I had a feeling it was going to be important, of course. But I didn't have any doubts about that. I knew lots of players and lots of people who could do it, and it didn't seem like a big challenge to me to put a band together for that. Just a few phone calls. Do you want to come and play with David Bowie at Wembley? Yes, I do.
More coming up shortly. First, though, please like, subscribe, and become a member. It really helps me continue with the podcast. Let's get back to Kevin. Did you grasp the enormity of Live Aid, or when did it hit you that this was the biggest effing event on the planet?
Well, I think on the morning, I think, when the traffic was quiet in London, and you realise that everybody's watching this thing, and we're about to get a helicopter across London to go and participate in it, and then rushing onto seeing Queen, and then running on the stage after them, and feeling that wave of that audience. It was like, I don't think I've ever quite felt anything like it. And realising at that moment how many eyes were on us, from around the world. All those teachers.
What difference does it make when it is a massive crowd? And not only a massive crowd, but Live Aid was slightly different because it was an incredibly positive and
yes, it was
warm, and everyone wanted this to work.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that since, a few dozen times with big gigs. I've been, I've played with Iggy Pop in front of Metallica's crowd in the Foro Sol in Mexico for 3 nights, and you get a similar kind of enthusiastic kind of atmosphere. But Live Aid did have something special. I think we all thought we were changing the world, as well as watching a concert or participating in a concert. There was a real extreme sense of togetherness and love that day, and that was something that's very rare, I think.
Did you watch other performances, or were you sort of too nervous and
I didn't really. I watched some in the morning before we left. I watched Status Quo and Adamant and things, and I saw that going on. But afterwards, I was really exhausted somehow, so I didn't even stay for the finale big song at the end. I was already gone, and I think I went to. Used to be a club called China White, was it? In London, and I think I ended up there with a bunch of people, and there was the American Live Aid was on the screen, so it was in the background, but we didn't really pay a lot of attention to it at the time. Don't know why. Just we'd done it. We'd really done it and done our bit for it, and I just felt quite exhausted. And I think it was only in subsequent days and weeks you realise, it was a really historic. Still, I think the biggest concert in the world, isn't it?
I think at that moment you probably reflected on your brother as well, and so I just wondered if that was somehow also a moment of change, because he was such a Bowie fan, and there you
Yeah,
are.
well, there was just the poignancy of I just wish I could have shared that with him, that experience, of course, and especially as my sister sang on Absolute Beginners as well. She's the female duet on the record, so that would have blown his mind. It really, really would have, and so it was obviously a big a moment to hope. Well, just to the poignancy of not being able to share that. So, because he supported my music career, my brother, he used to come around and see my bands and bring his friends, and he was really a good egg supporting it, and gave me a lot of encouragement. And he just would have, but also I think part of him thought, I'll never make anything of this, possibly, because he was like a pretty straight guy and he had a proper career and everything. So he would have been amazed and pleased, of course.
How did it change your professional life to have been on Live Aid and to be with Bowie?
Opens a lot of doors, doesn't it? That sort of thing. Obviously, it opens a lot of doors. The phone rang. I did a lot of sessions. I was asked to play with other bands. A lot of things happened because of that, and that's the great blessing of being associated, even peripherally, with people like David Bowie. And it's a blessing that keeps on giving your whole life, because he's just one of those few artists that has an absolutely bulletproof fan base, and always will have. And they're always interested in anybody who came close.
Through Bowie, you met Iggy Pop.
Absolutely, yeah. I did the Blah 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 album with them. So I was just floating around in London I was producing an Alien Sex Fiend record, and and I got a call saying, come out to Switzerland and play guitar, bring a guitar, play with Iggy Pop. And again, I was there. I mean, I was like, fantastic. I was an Iggy fan anyway. So yeah, that was an amazing thing. And that's led on to a relationship which only ended with Iggy professionally in 2019, when Brexit put an end to his British contingent.
What was your impression of Iggy Pop when you met him? Because obviously Iggy Pop on stage is one person, and I presume there is a slightly different person.
No, he is very much a Jekyll and Hyde thing as a performer. He definitely has this, two sides of him. And the side that the Jim Osterberg side is a very, very erudite, civilized, polite, very nice person. And Iggy Pop can be a little bit more capricious than that, shall we say? But it's not a calculating thing with him. It's just the thing he's developed himself as a performer, and he has that. That's why he has Iggy Pop. In the same way that I guess Bowie had Ziggy Stardust initially. He needed something, a role to inhabit to with complete abandon, and it turned into that. So that's what Iggy Pop is, really. It's the other. You could meet Jim and you could meet Iggy, and they'd be slightly different people. And there's no falsity about it either. They're both two sides of a coin, but they're both very real.
Well, that's fascinating, because I always feel that it's also a protection. There's to be able to inhabit a performer. Is a form of protetion. And
it gives you a safety net, doesn't it? Because Iggy did that, I didn't do it. That's what that, like the teddy bear incident on the live television show, where Iggy grabs hold of a big teddy bear on live children's TV during a performance, flips it over, and butt fucks the hell out of it on live children's TV, and then has to explain himself as Jim Osterberg afterwards. I'm really sorry. I didn't know what I was doing. And it's like that safety net. Oh, of course, that was Iggy Pop.
I remember interviewing Madonna, and during the interview, I asked her something, and she said, "What would Madonna say?"
Well, yeah. I think it's quite a useful device for some people, isn't it? To have an alter ego.
Well, also they're under enormous pressure, and you write a little bit about that in the book as well. That it was much better to be a sideman than.
Well, it's easy. You're not under the same pressure, are you? Your only pressure is really to make them look good and to know what you're doing. And that's something I can cope with all day long. You know, I can definitely do that. I can play guitar with Iggy Pop or David Bowie, and by the time I hit the stage, they're going to look good because I know what I'm doing. People haven't come to see me; they've come to see them. So I just have to be a cog in a machine and just watch it all unfold. So obviously, you're there next to the people, and you've got some of the same perks of the job. Private jets and 5-star hotels and great food and drink and girls and all whatever you want, you know. But you don't have the pressure. You can go home and be anonymous, which is something they can't do. And I think that's been great.
Is there a negative side to their existence in terms of maybe loneliness, not being able to trust people, or
Yeah, I mean, there's that. Obviously, somebody always wants something of you, don't they? If you're world famous and they always want something. So I suppose it must be hard to know who to trust, and also you can't. It's difficult to do ordinary things, isn't it? You know, you saw photographs of Bowie in later life, really dressed like your Uncle Jeff, you know, and smooching around in New York trying to avoid being photographed. And obviously, that's not a worry. I mean, you know, I'm sure some of it's a minor inconvenience, but I think people like that, to be the artists and the significant artists they are, they have to give up an awful lot of what we call normal relationships and homes and stability, and you know, they give all that up to be that.
yeah, I mean, another person, I mean, you mentioned him earlier that you've worked with, but he was someone who also had this sort of comedic side to him in a way. It was John Lydon. And I remember interviewing him, and he suddenly turns into this sort of, I don't know what to call it, a monster, but it's a really over the top aggressive figure, which he isn't in a way.
Well, he is and he isn't. I mean, he likes to. He sometimes he likes performative upset, you know, doesn't he? He likes to sort of tickle people or provoke people sometimes. I'm sure, you know, he's got a naughty side, you know, but he's a lovely bloke. He's coming to my hometown. Hastings Public Image are playing in Hastings in July, so I'm going to see them because again, I've played in band with all of them.
Well, also, yeah, I mean, didn't Prefab Sprout want you to be in? I was talking to Martin McAloon recently as well, and he went out on tour, of course. Did you go and see him?
No, I didn't manage to do that. But I knew he was out with Thomas Dolby a little bit, and he was out on his own a little bit. Oh, I love the Sprouts. Yeah, I mean, I was just drafted in to play some guitar on the Steve McQueen record, which was called Two Wheels Good in America. And I toured with them. I just did a tour with them. They did ask me to join, but I was producing records at that point and didn't feel like joining. I also thought that possibly there was a limited life in being a Prefab Sprout member, because it was fairly evident that Paddy was not overly fond of the spotlight, and he could have easily become a, you know, shrinking violet, which he sort of did, didn't he? He just ended up living in concert and making records under the stairs, you know.
One of the really fascinating stories that you have in your book is also about McCartney. How did you meet McCartney? How did that come about?
How did it come about? Oh, it was because I was in the house band for Jonathan Ross's TV show, The Last Resort. And McCartney was one of the last guests who came on the series I played with them, and he came on and played live. So he rehearsed with us all day, and then it was the first live TV he'd done in a couple of decades, I think. And we hit it off. I just played really well on that day, and he called me and said, "Come and, you know, drop what you're doing and come and be my guitar player." And it didn't work out for me. Although recently things have emerged, little bits of video have emerged of him and I and Elvis Costello and Hamish Stewart from Average White Band, kind of routining songs in Hog Hill Studio. And a few of the things I contributed to his record have come out on box sets where they put the sort of progression of the demos, you know, through the final versions of certain songs. So I did end up on a couple of records, but I would have liked to have done more with McCartney because I was a huge fan, but just personally, we didn't connect somehow. Something wasn't going to work there.
Yeah, he did this sort of what reads like a sort of test in some way, like
a sort of weird initiation, yeah, where he called me to his private den in his studio and then made me smoke a joint with him. And then just left me completely sort of bladdered from, not knowing what my name was, kind of thing, and then walked out saying, "That's you stoned." And I just didn't understand what that was about. I thought it was a bit of a weird test. I didn't know what was going on. So that sort of thing. I mean, it's sort of slightly unfinished business in a way. I really feel I could have contributed really well musically to him, but it's probably not going to happen now.
Well, it comes across that it seems that he may be quite sensitive to, because you'd I forgot what it was exactly, but you mentioned something.
I mentioned the Ruttles. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah,
that was Elvis Costello's explanation several years later as to why I didn't. I blotted my copybook really badly with him by mentioning the Ruttles. And for those of your viewers who might not know, the Ruttles was an affectionate pastiche of the Beatles, actually funded and supported by George Harrison himself. But obviously that parodic thing, McCartney was offended by it or didn't like it. He didn't like me mentioning it, and it just turned him off. So there you go.
I mean, your association with Bowie continued, obviously.
Yeah.
And in the Tin Machine era,
yeah,
you were the sort of fifth member of the.
Yeah, they brought me in. They brought me in towards the halfway through the record being made. So I was kind of tacked on to the band through some of the Swiss sessions, and then a trip to the Bahamas where we recorded some of it, and then the first tour, which I did. Again, I would have gone on to do the second tour, but I was again producing, and I turned Bowie down for the only time in my life for the second Tin Machine project. But I was brought in as a kind of fifth member, if you like.
And how did that work? Because he touted that as a sort of democracy, was it?
No. Well, I mean, nominally, it was it was anarchic, really, because it was anarchic because of the Sales Brothers, because they are a wild pair of geezers, they're pretty uncontrollable. Reeves and Bowie, though, had a very special, close, creative reign on that, I think. And in the end, it was Bowie's project. Everybody knew that, and Bowie was going to decide what ended up on the record, who was playing, and all the rest of it. Of course he was. So it wasn't really a democracy. It was it was probably more anarchic than many things he'd done. But he wanted it to seem like a democracy, but it certainly wasn't.
Yeah, and of course you mentioned Outside, and that was your track. How did when that came about, how did it come about? Is that Bowie's like in the studio and he's got a number of tracks and he's also open to hearing other music?
No, it was more that I was playing. I used to play some of the things I was writing at sound checks. It's just some of them come out of some of the songs I've written over the years are very much a product of my guitar playing and my guitar style. So I will end up playing them at sound checks because they make the walls bounce off in a certain way, or because they're a good way of testing out a certain amplifier or whatever. So I was just playing something one day that I'd written, and he just said, "What's that? Can I have that?" And I said, "Yeah." So I just jotted it down on a cassette for him. That's all, and gave it to him. And then he came back a year later or something and said, "Do you remember that tune we were knocking around with? It's now the title track of my album. Do you want to come and play something for me on it?" And so it was just like that. It wasn't we sat down in the room and thrashed out ideas like, Father Ted and Dougal trying to write a Eurovision hit. It wasn't like that. It was very much, and it was right. I just gave him an idea which he wanted. I did that a couple of times where he just had an ear out for something I was playing and said, "Oh, I like that. Can I have it?" Yeah. So.
How much do you think the outsider plays a central role in pop music?
Well, maybe less so now than it ever has. I don't know, really. I mean, it seems quite conformist now. When you look at Ed Sheeran and Taylor Swift, they seem like archetypal insiders, really. They're not very rebellious, are they? I mean, nothing wrong with them, but they're just not, compared to Iggy Pop and David Bowie, they're hardly exciting. In terms of that. So I think the outsider used to be everything, pop music. It used to be everything. But these days, I don't know. Where do you take it? It's a big spectrum, isn't it? You've got Gigi Allen on one end and the Wombles on the other. What can you say?
I mean, you do sort of talk about the fragility of artists in your book, and you know, with Morrissey and sort of focusing on bad reviews, which is an odd thing, you know, like for someone who's
just, just,
successful.
just sort of self-consciousness, isn't it? You know, or really being upset by or caring a lot about what people think of you. And I think that's something. I guess there are different types of ego who do this sort of thing. Some people really care about that. I mean, I get it. I mean, in the 5 years since I was Iggy's MD from 2014 to 19, and we went around the world twice, and we went everywhere, and we played, and I was really proud of the band and the way it was developing. And we used to you look at the YouTube sort of clips and things. Some of them are great, and so many people just saying, "What a fantastic band!" And Iggy's never sounded better. It's all great. And there's about 2 comments in that whole 5-year period of people go, "Oh, don't like the band much" or something, and that's what you remember. You go, and so I get. You know, I get it. If your whole thing is predicated on what people think of you, then you're going to get really upset when the enemy says, "This is a pile of shit, Morrissey. Go home," kind of thing, and you go to bed for a week.
I mean, we talked about creativity as also something a way of dealing with the wounds, and it's also, you know, a way of actually creating great music, but it's also dealing with the wounds of childhood. But sadly, even though there's this outlet for their deep wounds, some artists don't survive. One of them, who you knew, was Sinead O'Connor. And it feels a really hard thing that someone who clearly really had some, you know, these deep wounds, but also a motivation to change the world, to do something, couldn't survive the world herself.
You know, some people are fragile, aren't they? You know, throughout history, some people are just so sensitive and so fragile at the same time. You know, and that's what she was really. She could be really a fierce fighter. Obviously, everyone knows that about her. But she was also very troubled, and she had a terrible childhood. And I think she suffered a lot. I think, yeah, she was a lovely person. But you know, some people are just too fragile for this world, aren't they? And it just ends up defeating them. And I think she struggled all her life with her demons and all that. She could be so funny though, and so lovely. Sinead, she was great.
When Bowie died, everyone of our generation and later generations, but you know, there were so many people who were affected by it but didn't know him. You knew him and you worked with him. So can you remember that day and how it affected you?
Yeah, I felt really deeply affected by it. Yeah, really quite upset when I turned on the radio in the morning and just heard this medley of Bowie songs on news radio, and just think, oh my God, they only ever do this when someone's passed away. So yeah, I did feel really bad about it, but then I started to feel more inspired by it, because as the day went on, I did actually, you know, I locked myself away with a hanky and a copy of Blackstar in my studio, and I looked at the videos and I listened to the music. I thought, my goodness, this is a really considered, self-eulogizing kind of thing, isn't it? You know, it really is amazing. He's turned his death into a work of art, literally, and I just felt such admiration really at that point, just thinking, my goodness, that's so brave, it's so amazing. And it's not like a big ego trip either. It's like something you really want to give until your very last moment, and then say something about what you did in the world. I just thought it's a stunning thing.
Can you remember who you talked to that knew him as well?
Well, Brian Eno. I called Brian. We talked about it a bit. He didn't know what was going on day to day with David the last few years. We did actually, because I saw Brian often, and we used to say, what's going on with David? And he'd say, I don't know. I've heard he's ill. I don't know what he's doing. And he really didn't know. So, but I'd lost contact with a lot of people. I think I talked to Reeves a little bit, but just a few people. Yeah.
I mean, Bowie is sort of still central to your life because there's this Bowie celebration. Can you tell me how that's come about? And, you know, your
Well, I started to work with during the time I was last with Iggy. I got called by Mike Garson, genius piano player of David Bowie, and he added me to a celebrating David Bowie lineup of people. And I remember I wasn't actually playing at the time. I was in a bit of a sort of studio only phase after Bowie died, and I went to the concert at Brixton that happened a year after he died, where I didn't know Mike at the time, or Earl Slick, or I knew Gail Ann Dorsey from before she was with Bowie, but I'd watched that band with Mike and Earl Slick and all these people, and thought, wow, that's amazing. It's this feeling of sharing the man's music at this point, and just the sort of juxtaposition of Mike and Slicky, people who are completely opposite ends of the spectrum musically, and the way they could work together was only as a result of Bowie putting them together, really. And then I got a call from Mike saying, would you like to come and play with a band playing Bowie stuff? And of course I said yes. And then that's just cannoned me off into the whole post Bowie kind of celebration world there is, the Bowie-verse, we call it. And then I've got to meet and got to hang out with and play with Omar Hakim and Carlos Alomar and Jerry Leonard and all these, Mark Platy, all these people. I mean, they're now my friends and colleagues, which they never were when David was alive. And that's going to continue, I think, for the rest of my musical life. I don't see how it can't.
Tell me how the celebration works, though, because does it take the audience on some sort of journey throughout Bowie's life? Is it
well, different things have a different emphasis. I mean, Mike's thing, Mike genuinely loves Bowie's music, and anybody who goes on the internet saying, "Oh, you're just exploiting a dead man" or whatever, that's complete nonsense. Mike Garson is absolutely passionate about Bowie's composition and songwriting. He loves it, and he's really into it. So Mike's sets were always really far-ranging across the board. And then there have been other things. I just had a tour cancelled, actually, which was with Peter Murphy singing, and that was concentrating on a more sort of high-end rock end of Bowie's thing. And then it's not publicly announced yet, but we're about to go announce a tour with Carlos Alomar and George Murray in November this year, and that will concentrate on what's called the Damn trilogy period. That's Dennis Davis, the drummer, George Murray, and Carlos. And George and Carlos are still with us, and so there'll be George and Carlos, myself, Tal Bergman playing drums, and that's going to concentrate on the middle period where they were very influential on the music. So some of these things depending on who's playing, have a different color about them. And the thing about Bowie's oeuvre is it's so broad. It was such a long period, and it was such a wide-ranging styles of stuff. There's a million ways you can approach it.
Yeah, I mean, we all have elements throughout the whole of sort of Bowie's career where I don't know, what I do is sort of jump from one to the other. So my favorite eras change consistently.
Yeah, there's always more to discover. There's so much of it. And I do some one-man shows as well, that since the book I do a little one-man show, which is just part audio visual, part reading, part narration and songs and things. And for those things I work up some single guitar versions of Bowie stuff, and I just flit and sit between all these different eras and do these different things. Sometimes completely avoid the hits and go for songs like Slip Away, or just Joe the Lion or something, and just do just work out with a guitar and a looper a single version of those songs, and nothing's missing from those. If you approach it right, the writing is so complete, you can play it with one instrument and a loop, and it just works so well. It's so great.
One thing you talk about in the book, and I will sort of just use this as the final question, because it's something that really, it sort of struck me in a way, for someone who's been so successful in their career, which you have. You've worked with so many amazing artists and had a very big career, but you've had imposter syndrome. Do you still occasionally have it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I used to. Yeah, I mean, during recent Iggy things, there's always this nagging sort of thing that goes on in my head. Like in a field of 40,000 people watching you, you just think, well, 10,000 of them are probably better guitarists than me. but then the following thought is, but I'm here and you're there. So it's kind of all right, you know. So yeah, these are the things you always deal with. Psychology, you know, when none of us are very stable, all of us are on the spectrum of some kind or another. I'm very grateful for what's happened to me and the connection I've had with music and the amazing people I've managed to play with. But I'm still learning.
Yeah, and I want to say from the other side, I mean, I think, you know, as a consumer in a sense of popular music, I think we are also grateful for people who have contributed to popular culture and been part of our lives. So at the end, I just want to say, Kevin Armstrong, thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Up there is an interview I recommend. Down there is where you can find all the podcast interviews. And here is where you can connect.